watching CBC News Network. I'm Andrew Nichols. We are tracking the latest major developments from Fort McMurray this morning.
It's going to be a very extreme fire hazard kind of day.
A dire warning from fire officials in Alberta. They say Fort McMurray's already massive fire could double in size by the end of the day. A convoy of evacuees is back on the move. As many as 4,000 people could be heading south today on a route that takes them back through the fire-ravaged city.
Suddenly you find yourself homeless. It's unimaginable.
And Canadians step up in a big way to help those who've lost so much. And we are following developments with the Fort McMurray fire. After 5 days, the fire is still spreading fast. Here's what we know. It now covers 156,000 hectares. That's 1/3 bigger than New York City. And there's a good chance it will double in size just today. The convoy taking people from oil camps north of Fort McMurray has started up again after a pause overnight, so that convoy is going again. The province is supplying free fuel to people in the convoy who need it. They're providing it before you get into that convoy, so north of the city. They're also providing free gasoline south of Fort McMurray, so don't worry about that if you're a little bit worried about being short on gas. This also is just in from the CBC's Briar Stewart. This is regarding the Nexon Long Lake facility. Briar Stewart, who's in the fire zone, has just spoken with a band counselor for Fort McMurray First Nation. He says they have firefighters working the blaze, and he just got an update that fire is on both sides of the highway near Nexon Long Lake. His concern is that now with the wind, it could blow fire closer to the First Nation, but there's been no damage there so far. But this is obviously a developing story at the Fort McMurray First Nation, and a counselor there, a band counselor, is concerned that with the fire on both sides of the highway near Nexon Long Lake, that it could blow the fire closer to the First Nation. Just for your information, this is also from Briar Stewart reminding us that the entrance to the Nexon Long Lake facility is on Highway 881. The plant is about 20 kilometers off the highway, so this is for the First Nation itself. The CBC's Marion Warnica is near Fort McMurray and has more.
It's definitely a very different scene here this morning than it was yesterday. As you can see, smoke has descended on this area just a few kilometers north of the northern edge of Fort McMurray. This looks like an inversion when the smoke settles down, and the reason that it's in this area, some of the RCMP members and firefighters are telling me, is that the wind has shifted slightly, so that it is coming from the south and into the north. Now, it's a light wind. I haven't even felt any since I've been here. One of the officers told me that it measured on his phone at about 1 kilometer an hour, so that's good news. They're concerned about air quality, and of course they're concerned about getting people out of here as quickly and safely as they can. We have some good information for you this morning, new and updated information. If you are an evacuee from Fort McMurray who has been stranded here on the north side, we want to let you know that the convoy is open this morning. It opened as of 6 a.m., so that is the southbound Highway 63. RCMP are escorting people through. They're bringing them in smaller groups than they were yesterday, 24 cars at a time. But we can tell you that this lineup is not very long. And it is recommended that if you are one of the northern evacuees, you should get down to the roadblock here as soon as you can. Another piece of information that you should know is that there is a fueling station right at the mouth of this lineup to get into the convoy. So if you're worried about fuel, don't worry, because it is free gas that is available to you to fuel up before you head through town. I'm told that the trip can take between 20 minutes to an hour, depending on the conditions as you go through. And when you get to the south side of the city, there will be more fuel available to you as you go through. So that's welcome news as well. Of course, we're going to be following this throughout the day and updating this information for you. But once again, just for your information, the convoy, the checkpoint at Highway 63 headed south is open. It opened at 6 a.m. today. They're taking through smaller groups, 24 cars at a time, but the lineup right now is not very long. So it is recommended, because of the smoke and the air quality right now, that you get down to this checkpoint, which is a few kilometers south of the Northland sawmill, as soon as you possibly can. Marion Warnica, CBC News, near Fort McMurray.
Once the convoy gets out of the danger zone, people will find their own temporary housing, or they'll head to one of the 10 centers set up by the province. One of those shelters is in the little town of Lac La Biche, about 290 kilometers south of Fort McMurray. The CBC's Evan Dyer is there, and he joins us now live. So, Evan, what's happening there?
Well, Andrew, the first thing I should tell you is actually coming from our colleagues just north of that north checkpoint above Fort McMurray. Apparently, a second convoy, a second group of cars have now just departed from there, heading through Fort Mac on their way to Point South. These are smaller groups than the groups we saw yesterday, a couple of dozen cars rather than a few hundred in each group. Once they get past Fort Mac Airport, which is south of the city, they seem to be being released by the police, and at that point they have the discretion to go down Highway 63 straight towards Edmonton, or to come down Highway 881 to Lac La Biche area, and that's one of the reasons why officials here don't really know how many people to expect. We spoke just a little while ago with Regional Fire Chief for Lac La Biche County, John Kokotilo. Let's listen in.
There was speculation of 9,000 people coming down the two highways. They will determine themselves and choose which way they're going to go, whether they're going to go to Edmonton or if they're going to be coming here or to some of the other outlets. So right now we're just waiting and hoping that we can handle the numbers.
So, Evan, what kind of stories are you hearing from people arriving where you are?
Yeah, there are people here who, they've been through a lot, right? They don't want to be on television necessarily, but they are telling us their stories. And there are two that I really have got to share with you. One of them is about the Tower Road campground in Fort McMurray. This is just immediately west of the Timberley neighborhood. And of course, Fort Mac's always had a housing shortage, right? A lot of people live in campers and other kinds of temporary accommodation. What happened there is there's a couple who don't necessarily want to be named because they resisted the evacuation order and stayed. And they basically assembled all the fire extinguishers they could get their hands on, and they sat out as the fire blew past that campground. They say it came through so fast that it burned all of the grass before getting into the trees, and there were several small fires started around the campground. They spent the night, this couple, running around with fire extinguishers, putting out those fires, and another man who lives in that campground says he believes they saved about 60 campers on their own. After the fire was through, they did indeed evacuate. They're now out of Fort Mac, staying with friends to the south of the city. Another story of an amazing escape, one of the most harrowing probably we've heard, was of a woman who fled in her truck while her husband was still trying to get home from work. This is a couple who live in the Abasand area. She drove through a real inferno in her truck to the point that it melted the fender wheels, the fender wells rather I should say, and the headlights. She could hear the truck crackling. Her husband said thank God it was a diesel, not a gas truck, or it might very well have burst into flames. Once she got through the fire, she pulled over, and her husband, who was being given a ride by a colleague from work, found her on the shoulder, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. He had to help to physically remove her hands from the steering wheel. She'd been through such a fright. She had a 3-week-old baby with her in that truck. Fortunately, they were also able to continue on in that burned out vehicle and make it to safety. So those are the kinds of stories that we're hearing from some of these evacuees. It gives you an idea of what they've been through.
Oh my God, it's just unbelievable to hear you tell these stories, Evan. And now I just want to ask you a little bit about it. I know that you're busy working with the people and the evacuees, but we've heard from Briar Stewart saying that there's concern about the Fort McMurray First Nation, that the fires on both sides of the highway there, that it could blow closer to the First Nation. So far, there's no damage. And then, are you speaking to the evacuees or hearing from people who are learning today that this fire, which is already 156,000 hectares, could double in size by the end of the day? Fortunately, though, from what we understand, it's mostly going into forested areas. But this fire, it's hot there today, right? And this fire just seems to grow and grow and grow.
It's warming up, but we're heading for a very hot day. Yesterday the high was 21 degrees. Today we're expecting 28, which is pretty similar conditions to back around Monday, Tuesday, when this fire really started to get out of control. And there's concern all over this area about fire hazard. Even here where I am, there's concern. And of course, a fire ban everywhere. Fort McMurray First Nation specifically is to the southeast of the city, I believe, and we saw people coming from that community and a neighboring community of Anzac on Wednesday. That was evacuated a day after Fort Mac, and in fact some of the people who were evacuated out of those communities were themselves evacuees who were then pushed on. So this situation is moving so quickly. I don't think that most of those Fort Mac First Nation refugees, if you can call them that, who are here, the evacuees from that community, really know necessarily that the fire is now, at the gates of their community. And we've also heard, of course, that Anzac has sustained losses. Anzac was hit by the fire and several structures were destroyed. So those evacuees who arrived here on Wednesday night are now the people who probably have the most immediate worries about the state of their property.
All right, Evan, thank you. That is the CBC's Evan Dyer live in Lac La Biche, Alberta.